you dirty potters, how are you today? Today we're going to talk about something in the channel that I feel like we should have talked about quite some time ago. In today's episode, we're going to talk about crazing. For those of you who don't know, crazing is usually considered a glaze flaw, along with pitting, crawling, any type of overfiring or underfiring, things of that nature. But today, we're going to concentrate on what crazing is, some of the myth behind it, and a very, very easy way to fix it. Now, I do realize that there's a lot of people who probably Googled this and found this video because they don't know what crazing is, they don't know how to fix it, they want to know if they can refire their stuff and get rid of it, they want to know what they have to do to get rid of this crazing issue, and they don't want to hear all the explanation, right? Which is kind of sad because this art form takes a lot of patience, but you don't have the patience to hear the explanation to how to fix your pot. Anyway, if you really just wanted like a 1 or 2 sentence answer, click this timestamp right here. It will take you to the literal spot where I tell you how to fix crazing, because it's really easy to fix crazing, but you do need an underlying understanding of what causes crazing, and there's a bunch of misinformation out in the pottery community, in the pottery world, where people will tell you like, oh, you opened your kiln too early, oh, you just gotta add more silica. Things that are just old potter's tales that aren't true. And in today's video, we're gonna go over some of those and how to fix it. For those of you who are just experiencing crazing, or you have no idea what crazing is whatsoever, crazing is generally considered a pottery flaw, especially for the functional pottery world. You're making bowls, you're making cups, and you see this on the inside of your bowls, on the cups, and on the outside of your work, and you have no idea what it is. Visually, crazing looks like this, and it's usually categorized by little crazes in your glaze matrix. These crazes are really just the word we use for cracks in the clay body, but there's a difference. These crazes technically go all the way down to your clay body. It's not just the glaze matrix and your pottery is fine. It technically causes tiny little cracks inside of your clay body as well. It's generally not considered food safe for reasons that we'll go over later. It's generally considered a functional flaw because it makes your clay body weaker and the food safety thing. And it's also generally not too difficult to fix. But let's go over the very first one here. Crazing. Why is it not food safe? As far as functional pottery goes, because I know there's plenty of you sculptors out there, and this doesn't really affect you, not many people are eating off of fully fledged Rodin sculptures. You know what? And if you are, I'm not even mad. It's impressive, really. As far as functional ware goes, there's one main concern when it comes to food safety. As I said before, these are tiny little cracks inside the glaze matrix of your pottery, and they go all the way down to your work as well. This means that any food that you put in there will technically get inside of these little cracks, and it's not super difficult to get out, but they do stay in there for quite some time. I actually have an Instagram subscriber of mine, a very long time follower of mine, named Heather, who had this very old antique plate that she put butter inside of and cooked with it, and she's been using it for years and years, only to take it out and see that the butter was still stuck inside of the cracks. So when she put it in the oven or the microwave, she heated the pot up, it ended up bubbling out of those cracks. And that's generally what happens with crazeware, especially if you have a lot of crazes. You put something inside of it, let's say tomato juice or coffee or any type of liquid. Those cracks will generally take whatever you put on them and it'll leak down into the clay body and the glaze matrix. Which means that even if you wash it, let's say you just hand wash it, dip it in water real quick. I'm one of those people where I just hand wash a lot of my stuff. Technically speaking, there's still a little bit of germs, still a little bit of leftovers, if you will, inside of the crazing or the cracks of that pot, and this can cause a lot of things. Mold can grow in there, general germs can grow in there, you get cross-contamination. If you're allergic to anything, technically, the food particles from the previous thing that you put in there are in there. Generally speaking, most of the clay community and potters out there will agree that crazing is not food safe, majoritively for sanitization reasons. Those are the reasons that crazing is not considered food safe as far as a functional stance goes. But there's a deeper problem with crazing. Crazing technically goes all the way down to the pot itself. You have to remember when you're putting glaze on a pot, they kind of breathe together in a certain fashion, right? That's what I call it. I call it breathing. So I could say thermal expansion of this, thermal expansion of that, but realistically, we're in the kiln, they expand and contract due to heat. And this to me kind of looks like breathing. So when they don't breathe together, for lack of a better term, they end up crazing. This crazing technically goes all the way down to the pot, and that's the real underlying issue for most of our functional ware. It becomes less functional because it has less strength and durability, because those crazes are technically cracks that go down to the baseline of not only your glaze matrix, but down to the pot itself. So not only is it not food safe for sanitary reasons, it technically makes your pot weaker. I know that most of us are worried about our customers, or we're worried about crazing for food safety standards and sanitation standards, But realistically speaking, I'm also, as a crafter, worried about the durability of my work as it goes out into the world and is handled by everyday people who aren't crafters. And because of that, there's an extra reason for me to worry about crazing. I just don't want it anywhere near my functional work now. I even have a couple of pictures the person on Instagram sent me. You want to see them? They're gross. You sure you want to see them? They're gross. Ah, here they are. Nasty, right? Grody, bro. So far in that I know, the subscriber heated the pot up for some reason, and they must have been cooking something or planning to cook something inside of this dish, and they saw the butter from the previous things they've been cooking in them bubble up through those crazes, and this is what it looks like. I would like to note before we move on from this section that this was a very antique pot that was not even made in America. I think it was made in Italy or France last time I looked at the bottom. It probably was made for a productionist, or it was probably made for somewhere to, like, they produced it and they sent it to a shop and that shop then sent it out to the world. But I would like to say that a lot of people talk a lot of mess about the products that are made today. They seem to think that antiques were made better back in the day, or that things that are made from authentic places like Italy and France are always better, especially a long time ago. Not so much. Not so much. If I can take a really quick side trip to we have to stop this as a society island. A lot of things that were made like 40, 50, 60 years ago aren't considered safe by our standards anymore. They used to put lead in candy, in toys, and paint, and in glaze. It's one of the reasons why whenever you get on Facebook and talk about food safety and glazes, there's always this usually older crowd of people who are like the glaze police, who are really just hounding you down and like weirdly gatekeeping you for some weird reason. Sorry, I just wanted to take a quick side view to things were better back in the day, and no they're not island. I think people see like things like antique and made in Italy and go, oh, it must be the genuine article. Things were made way better back in the day. Not really, realistically. They just weren't as produced, but they weren't made better. I just wanted to debunk that real quick. That seems to be a thing as far as like antique collectors. They're like, oh, it was made in Italy and it's antique. It must be better quality. Not really. Not everything that's made from an older generation is immediately better, to be honest with you, especially from a crafter's point of view. Most crafters are very nitty-gritty like myself with a lot of the detail in their work. They try and make them as safe as possible for their customers. And that's why we talk about things like crazing. But in all reality, yeah, it was made in Italy, but it was probably from a productionist trying to make a quick buck and has a bunch of craze ware. A lot of you probably have stuff like this in your pantry and you don't know about it or know what it is. But now you do. Let's go over to our second point and our easiest thing to talk about. How does this happen? Believe me when I say there's a bunch of old potter tales out there of how crazing happens. Oh, I opened my kiln too early. Oh, I didn't add enough silica, so there's not enough glass inside of the mixture of glaze that I made. Oh, there's this. Oh, it's really cold outside. The pottery was really hot. Oh my God. Believe me when I say about 90 to 95% of crazing in pottery is usually caused by thermal expansion. Every glaze, every clay, well, technically everything in the known world has thermal expansion, but it does relate when you're trying to fuse two things together, like a glaze and a clay. These two things have thermal expansion. The difference is that based on the chemical composition in the glaze minerals inside of your glaze versus the chemical composition inside of your clay body, because they don't dig it straight out of the ground, they treat it, they make sure there's no air inside of it, they pug it for you, they mix a bunch of chemicals in there so it melts at a certain cone at a certain temperature. These two things both have different thermal expansion rates, and because of that, you're trying to fuse them together into one product in the kiln. Generally speaking, without going into too much explanation, the glaze and the clay both have a thermal expansion rate. These two thermal expansion rates need to match up fairly well unless it's going to cause stress on one or the other, usually the glaze matrix, right? So what happens is you put them in the kiln, they both kind of expand, thermal expansion, and when they cool down, one of them ends up cooling down way slower than the other. But of course you're trying to fuse them together, right? This creates some type of stress on the clay and the glaze. This ends up making little tiny cracks that we call crazing in the kiln. That's really all it is, and I'm very, very pressed to find an example of where crazing would happen in a glaze or a clay where it wouldn't have anything to do with thermal expansion inside of the kiln. The thermal expansion of your clay versus your glaze is very, very important and is usually, and I say usually because there's going to be one nerd in the comments below who's like, I dropped my pot and it got glass cracks in it. That's technically crazing. Not really. I'm just saying 90 to 95% for those of you who are going to try and argue against me, but I am very hard pressed to find an example of crazing fresh out of the kiln that doesn't have anything to do with thermal expansion with the clay body versus the glaze. Well, how am I supposed to know what the thermal expansion of my clay body is, Dante? I have no idea. You told me why crazing's bad. You told me what the main cause of it is. This doesn't help me because I can't change anything, right? No, you can change something. In fact, if you know the name of your own clay body, let's take one of my favorite clay bodies, Redstone. I think it's WC-420. And if you look all the way at the bottom of that list, you'll see something called COV. I'm pretty sure this stands for coefficient of expansion. That's pretty much your thermal expansion number. This is the number you're looking at when you're talking about thermal expansion. As a side note, I feel like a lot of people don't know this, but if you ever want to know the percentage of anything about your clay, most clay companies, unless it's like some weird, wild, out there experimental clay, will list all the information you need on their website. You really just got to look up the clay name, put the cone in, and it pops right up. I tend to be a Laguna and Aardvark boy myself because they do such a great job at. I'm not sponsored by them. Before you get down there in the comments, I'm not sponsored by them, but I would like to say that they've been long-standing for me as far as like proven good quality clay with all the information I need. There's never been a time where I've been like, oh no, I really wish I knew the coefficient of expansion and the absorption rate of my clay, words that people usually don't even use in the clay community. And they just have it there. Okay, Dante, you're an Aardvark simp. We get it. Moving on. And on to the last thing on the list. How do I fix it? It's really easy, actually. And I know for a lot of you, this isn't gonna be something that you wanna do, but just change your clay body. I know I'm saying it as if it's a very simple thing to do, and I know I'm saying it as if like, just go out and buy a new bag of clay. Everybody has the money for that, right? I'm not tuned into everybody's financial situation. But I will say, from the point of view of someone who not only makes their own glazes, but also tests company glazes on YouTube for you to see, I will say that the alternatives are much harder than just buying a new bag of clay. If I have a glaze body that doesn't fit with a clay body, and the thermal expansion is so different that it's causing crazing, which makes my stuff non-food safe for my customers, or if I plan to eat out of it at a later time, that doesn't bode well for not only my customers, but the health of my customers, right? So what I want to do is I want to fix that. The easiest way to fix that, unless you're a literal glaze chemist, is to just change your clay body. I know there's a lot of you out there right now who are looking at me like, but I really like sandstone buff because it has little specks of iron in it and it makes it look cool if I put a certain glaze on it, but it's crazing, so I don't want to change it. There are so many clays out there that can imitate sandstone buff with a different thermal expansion rate. You can find one if you just look. It might be a little more expensive, but I would argue that the safety of you and your customers come above your minor inconvenience for you wanting to see pretty little specks inside of clay. I know that sounded a little rude, but it's true. Crazing is not food safe. It happens because the difference in thermal expansion versus the clay body and the glaze body, and it's very easy to fix by just changing your clay body. That's it, it's really easy. Not only can you change your clay body, you can just look at the schematics on the website of what your clay body has for thermal expansion or coefficient of expansion and figure those numbers out. You know what I mean? The worst case scenario, you'll change it to another clay body and it'll end up crazing, and then you'll just end up going the opposite direction as far as the numbers go, and then it takes you like 2 or 3 tries, then you're done. Which is way better than getting this.
You don't want to be like
I'm gonna keep showing you this picture.
This is disgusting.
I'm gonna keep showing it to you as long as you keep arguing with me. As a final little ending to this video, I want to go over some things that are just old potter's tales. People are gonna say them to you who don't have enough experience or enough the research to back these things up with sources. I will link all my sources down below, by the way. And like, honestly, they're just cap. They're just major cap. This person lied their way through the military from a grunt all the way to a major, and now they're major cap. One of the most common pieces of misinformation that you'll hear in the potter world is that crazing is caused by opening your kiln too quickly after a glaze fire. That is a lie. That is a straight lie. It is caused by the difference in between thermal expansion of your clay body and your glaze body. That is it. And I've already showed you how to look up the numbers for coefficient of expansion in your clay body. You can check those yourself. That is what it is caused by, though. There is this weird form of people out there who are like, oh yeah, the company said that I gotta let my kiln cool down to room temperature before I open it, so I wait because I don't want to cause crazing or pitting, or that's not what happens. Generally speaking, if you're putting your stuff in the kiln and it's gonna craze anyway because the chemistry didn't work out too well. The chemistry of the thermal expansion of the clay and the glaze body didn't work out. They didn't breathe at the same time. as I like to say, and they were gonna craze no matter what. In all reality, when you get your kiln and the instructions say wait till it cools down to the lowest possible temperature before opening, has nothing to do with crazing whatsoever. People correlated that on their own. They were like, oh, the companies must want our work to look good. No, the companies don't want you to burn yourselves. The companies tell you to wait until it cools down and so that you don't open it at 500 degrees and try and vent it at like 600 degrees and whatnot, is because it's a 600 degree box of fire. It's such a weird potter's tale too. Like, I thought we were over this mentality that companies had our best interest in heart as far as health. Their job is to make money, guys. They don't care about your work. If you bought 100 kilns from any kiln making company and you made awful, terrible work, they would go home happy. Old potter's tale number 2, add more silica to your glaze. This is something for potters who make their own glazes. There's this weird type of information out there where people go, oh yeah, just add more glass. The more glass, the less crazing you'll get, the less pitting you'll get, the less this you'll get. Oh, just add more silica. That doesn't really work. It works sometimes, but it works because you get lucky. It's much easier to just change your clay body, really, so that way you don't have these problems ever again, because you'll notice if you just add more silica, you don't know what amount to add, number one. There's no promise that it'll work. You're changing the chemistry of your glazes because you're technically adding silicon to the element silicon, right, to your glaze. Am I saying that right? Silicone? I feel like it's silicon. It seems weird to say, but silica, silicon, and silicone are all different things. The third and final one that I like a lot, but is kind of like the first one. It was really cold where I am. If opening your kiln early doesn't make crazing and it's caused by thermal expansion instead, why do you think that like the temperature, unless you live in the, no, that's another potter tale. That one was one that like somebody threw to me last week. They were like, well, it's crazed because I took it out the kiln at 200 degrees. It's really cold where I am. No, bruv, that's not it. Before we give you this disclaimer at the end of the video, because I really do need to say one last thing, just to kind of calm everybody down. I had cold brew, I'll admit it. Let's recap real quick. Number 1, crazing is generally not considered food safe for sanitary reasons. Number 2, crazing is caused by the difference in between thermal expansion of your clay body and your glaze body. And number 3, the easiest way to fix it is to just change your clay body. Usually the thermal expansion of the clay that you're using will just usually work around whatever you're gonna glaze with. If it doesn't, you just go in the opposite direction. If you don't know what the coefficient of expansion in your clay body is, you can very easily look it up by looking up your own clay and going to the website, and it'll show you on the company website, oh hey, the COE, right there, that's the number, right there. I will fully admit that I don't know the thermal expansion rate of a lot of my glazes, because anytime crazing has happened, I've just changed my clay body, and throughout the years, I've just had a list of clay bodies that I don't use that don't fit with my Cone 6 glazes, right? So because of that, I've just never had to know that number, because I've only known the number of clay thermal expansion, the coefficient of thermal expansion, just because, like, I don't need to, I already fixed the problem. So I can't sit here and go, oh yeah, it's not a 1-to-1 ratio. If you see 5.5 COE, then you gotta make sure your glaze is 5.5. I have no idea if that works out that way, but I will say, I've always just changed my clay body and the thermal expansion has worked out. And a final disclaimer for any of you who are super freaked out right now about your customers not being safe, or you eating off of crazeware and it not being safe and you're gonna get sick and oh my God, it's not that dangerous. It's really not that dangerous. I will say the official answer from most people in the clay and pottery and functional community are that it is not food safe, but we say that underneath the guise of we don't want to go down the slippery slope of like, oh, everybody can just use it, it's fine. But realistically speaking, there aren't many cases of people getting sick from crazing. I don't know any cases of anybody dying from crazing. I have a bunch of stuff that has crazeware in it that ends up being just fine. I eat off of it all the time. I have really old friends of mine that I gave pots away to that have crazing in them. The real issue with crazeware, as long as you have like first world sanitary standards, like you wash your pot really well, you're not just eating off, dunking it in water with no soap in it, not scrubbing it, and putting it off to dry. There's probably gonna be lots of people down in my comments below, somewhere in the middle who didn't see this part of the video yet, who go, oh, I ate off crazeware before. My grandma has a dish back from the 80s and it has crazeware on it and we've always been fine. Oh, I've never gotten sick from crazeware. Well, even though all the things that I said previously were true, this is also true. Crazing is not really that big of a deal. It is officially not food safe. But just because something has a facet of not food safety doesn't mean you eat off of it once and you're just gonna like fall over and die. Realistically speaking, as long as you have like first world sanitary standards and you wash your stuff, like you don't get a mug and drink out of it and have like tomato juice in it and put it down and let it sit there and mold over the course of a week and then rinse it out with water and no soap and don't scrub it and then keep drinking out of it in that fashion, you should be fine. It's not a giant medical thing. There aren't doctors everywhere going, oh, he's got the craze. Well, he should have known better than to eat off of craze ware. Fool. While crazing is a negative thing for functional pottery, it's not such a big deal that we would freak out over it. But we generally don't like to sell it to our customers. I always go the path of, if I ever have any craze ware in my stuff and I sell it to a customer, I put it down in the information. This pot has crazing, and then I put a link. This is what crazing is. And I might even link them to this video. This is why it's not food safe. Use at your own discretion, because I can't tell you how to use the stuff that you buy from me. I'm not gonna dictate that. But I did inform you of what it is and you bought it at your own peril. That's it. Well, thank you, Dirty Potters, for joining me today. I know that was kind of a handful. I've had a couple of requests of people asking me about crazing. It's kind of a larger topic, but a very simplistic answer. If you're wondering what crazing is, that's why it's not food safe, that's how it's caused, that's how you fix it. This video just went over the 3 things that you probably had the majority of questions to as far as crazing goes. If you like this kind of content and you found this video informative, go ahead and leave a like for me. It helps other potters not knock on my door who think that they're the glaze police. You know who you are, you're out there.
Thank you for your patronage.
When you have crazing in your work, not only is it not food safe, it's also technically weaker than most other pots that don't have crazing. It's like any other state besides California in America. Your pot is probably just weaker than mine.